Welcome to another special long story made by Oracle 1. The doppelgangers of the remote cabin in the woods. The woods didn't make noise anymore. That was the first thing Michael noticed when he stepped out of the truck. No crickets. No birds. Not even the wind. Just stillness, an unnatural, suffocating kind of quiet that pressed against his eardrums. He stood there for a moment, one hand on the truck door, listening for something. Anything, but there was only the faint tick of the cooling engine. He swallowed hard. The road that had led him here was little more than a dirt trail carved into the forest, 20 miles from the nearest gas station and at least 50 from town. It had taken him nearly 3 hours to find the place. His GPS had glitched twice, spinning the digital compass like it was drunk. Now that he was here, standing in the middle of nowhere, even the air felt wrong. Heavy. Electric. The smell of pine sap mixed with something else, damp earth, maybe, or something older, something that reminded him of wet iron. The cabin stood at the end of a sloping gravel drive, framed by towering pines. It looked ancient but solid. 2 stories of weathered timber, its roof sagging slightly, windows clouded with grime. The porch leaned, boards warped from rain, and a faded sign above the door read, "Whispering Hollow." A fitting name, he thought grimly. He adjusted the strap of his duffel bag and climbed the porch steps. Each creak sounded like a complaint. When he turned the brass key in the lock, it resisted at first, then gave way with a low groan, like the cabin itself had exhaled. The smell hit him first. Old wood, mildew, and a faint whiff of smoke, as though a fire had once burned and never quite gone out. Inside, dust motes drifted lazily through beams of fading light. A single table sat near the window, next to a cold stone fireplace. On the table lay a folded note and a small brass key. He unfolded the note. The handwriting was old-fashioned, shaky. "Welcome to the cabin. Respect its silence. Do not stay out after dark." No signature. Michael raised an eyebrow, tossing the note aside. "Great. Spooky forest Airbnb rules," he muttered. He dropped his bag on the couch, the only piece of furniture that didn't look like it would collapse under his weight, and took a slow walk through the cabin. The kitchen was small, but functional. A half-broken fridge, a gas stove, and a narrow window overlooking the back of the forest. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms, one with a large bed and one with an old writing desk. The latter would be his office. He came here to work, after all. That was the whole point of this trip: solitude. No distractions, no noise. His first novel had done well, but the second was a disaster in the making. Writer's block had sunk its teeth into him months ago and refused to let go. His editor wanted pages. He wanted silence. Well, he'd gotten it. By nightfall, he'd unpacked, lit a small fire, and made himself instant noodles on the stove. The forest beyond the windows was already black, the moon buried behind a solid wall of clouds. He sat by the fireplace, bowl in hand, staring into the flames. They cast tall shadows that climbed the walls like something alive. Occasionally, the wood popped and shifted, startling him with its sudden cracks. He found himself glancing toward the window every few minutes. The reflection of the room shimmered faintly on the glass, firelight, his own shape moving, the outline of the couch. And then, something else. For just a second, he thought he saw movement outside. A pale shape between the trees. He froze, setting the bowl down slowly. The shape didn't move. The shadows flickered, distorting. Maybe it was a trick of the firelight. He leaned closer. It was gone. He exhaled, forcing a laugh. "Okay. Paranoia. Check." The note's words echoed in his head. "Do not stay out after dark." The first few days were uneventful. He wrote, ate, slept, repeated. During the day, the forest was almost beautiful. Shafts of sunlight cut through the trees, glittering on dew. The silence felt less oppressive then, more like solitude, less like a warning. But as the sun dipped low each evening, something in the air shifted. The stillness returned, heavier, deeper, as if the forest was holding its breath. By the third night, Michael had stopped going outside after sunset entirely. It began subtly. The reflection in the bathroom mirror would seem to hesitate, like there was a delay. His reflection's eyes would linger a second too long, its blink would be offbeat. He blamed exhaustion. Then, one morning, he came downstairs and found the front door wide open. He stood frozen on the threshold. The cold morning air poured in, raising goosebumps along his arms. He could see his own footprints in the dirt outside, but there was another set too. Bare feet, leading into the trees. He followed them just far enough to see where they stopped, right at the edge of a small, stagnant pond. The surface reflected the gray sky perfectly, like a sheet of glass. Something rippled under it, though the air was perfectly still. Michael backed away, his pulse pounding. That night, he pushed a chair against the door and left the fire burning until dawn. The next morning, he found words written in the condensation on the window. "Let me in." He stared at them, his breath catching in his throat. The letters were shaky, almost childish. The fog began to fade as the room warmed, and the message disappeared with it. He sat at the table, hands trembling. It's got to be a draft or something," he whispered. Condensation. Random streaks. But even as he said it, he knew the words had been deliberate. He didn't write them, so who did? That evening, he tried to distract himself with work. He opened his laptop and stared at the blinking cursor on the screen. He typed a few lines, deleted them, then froze when something caught his eye in the reflection of the monitor. The room behind him was the same, but his reflection wasn't moving with him. It just sat there, perfectly still, staring at the screen. Slowly, its mouth began to open. Michael turned, heart hammering, but there was no one there. When he looked back, the reflection was normal again. He slammed the laptop shut and backed away from the desk. He could feel eyes on him. Not from the window. Not from the walls. From inside the house. Sleep became impossible. He heard footsteps at night, soft, slow, deliberate. Sometimes above him, sometimes behind the walls. Once, he heard the faint click of the doorknob turning, though the door was locked tight. He began leaving the lights on. Even then, the shadows seemed to move when he wasn't looking. By the seventh day, he was running on coffee and panic. That morning, he caught sight of himself in the mirror again, and froze. The reflection wasn't tired. It looked rested. Smiling faintly. It lifted its hand and waved. Michael didn't. Michael staggered backward, tripping over the edge of the rug. His shoulders slammed into the table, sending his coffee mug crashing to the floor. For several long seconds, he just stood there, staring at the mirror. His reflection had returned to normal, same wide eyes, same ragged expression. The faint smile was gone. He forced a shaky laugh. "You're losing it, man. Cabin fever. Isolation." He turned away from the mirror, running a hand through his hair, and whispered, "It's just you." But deep down, he didn't believe it. The silence in the cabin seemed to listen. By afternoon, fog had rolled in from the valley, swallowing the forest. It crept between the trees like smoke, wrapping the cabin in a thick, wet blanket. From the window, Michael could barely see the porch. The world outside had vanished into white. He sat by the fire again, clutching his mug. He hadn't written a single word in 2 days. His laptop sat on the desk, black screen faintly reflecting the flickering flames. He couldn't stop thinking about the other footprints, the ones by the pond. Bare feet. It was ridiculous, but he kept imagining his own doppelganger, his exact copy, standing there at the water's edge, watching him through the trees. He told himself it was impossible. Doppelgangers were myths, folklore, omens of death. But the thought gnawed at him like hunger. He had seen his reflection move on its own. And it had smiled. That night, he heard someone breathing outside his bedroom door. He froze under the blanket, eyes wide open in the dark. The sound was unmistakable, soft, slow, rhythmic. Human. Then came a whisper. "Michael?" His blood ran cold. The voice was his own. He reached for the lamp, flicked it on, and the room flooded with yellow light. The sound stopped immediately. He waited, heart thudding, for what felt like an hour. Finally, he crept to the door and pressed his ear against the wood. Nothing. Just silence. He cracked it open. The hallway beyond was empty. But when he glanced toward the end of the hall, toward the bathroom mirror, he saw movement. A shape. Someone stepping out of sight. He slammed the door and locked it. The next morning, he found muddy footprints leading from the hallway into the living room. They stopped right in front of the fireplace, then turned back toward the door. Michael stared at them for a long time. They were the same size as his own. He pressed his palms against his temples. No, 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 no. You didn't sleepwalk. You didn't. He hadn't even slept. He needed to leave. He grabbed his keys, his jacket, his bag. The truck sat in the drive, covered in dew. He climbed in, started the engine, nothing. The starter clicked, then went silent. He tried again. Click. Dead. He slammed the steering wheel, shouting until his throat hurt. When he looked up, he saw something move in the fog, right behind the trees. Someone standing there. He squinted. It was him. The figure didn't move. It just stood there in the mist, its head tilted slightly to one side. Michael blinked, rubbed his eyes. But when he looked again, the figure was still there. Closer now. He could make out its face. Pale, smiling faintly. And then it raised its hand and waved. Michael threw the truck door open and stumbled out, shouting, "Who are you? What do you want?" No answer. The fog thickened around the figure until it disappeared completely. Michael backed toward the cabin, shaking, trying to steady his breathing. He slammed the door behind him and locked it, pressing his back to the wood. Something scraped across the window glass. Long, deliberate strokes. Like fingernails tracing letters. He turned slowly. There, written backwards so he could read it from inside, were the words. "Let us in." Michael barely slept after that. He sat by the fire, poker in hand, staring at the window until dawn. The fog never lifted. He couldn't tell if it was still night or day anymore. Every now and then, he'd hear soft tapping from the glass or a low creak from the hallway. Once, when he blinked, he could have sworn he saw his reflection standing in the window across the room, though he wasn't anywhere near it. When he went closer, it smiled again. 2 days later, something changed. The power flickered once, then died completely. The lights went out, the fridge hummed to silence, and even the fire began to dim. Darkness filled the cabin like water. He lit a candle, holding it high. The flickering light painted the walls in trembling gold. The window reflected his face again, warped and doubled by the candle's flame. But in that reflection, behind him, was another silhouette. He spun around. Nothing. When he turned back, there were 2 reflections now. Both him. Both watching. One smiled. The other whispered, "You don't belong here." Michael screamed and threw the candle. The wax splattered against the wall, plunging the room into black. He stumbled backward, tripped over the coffee table, and fell hard. Something moved in the dark, a soft rustle, like clothes brushing wood. He grabbed the fire poker again and swung wildly. "Stay away. Stay the hell away from me." No answer. Just the sound of breathing. He crawled toward the fireplace, struck a match, and lit another candle. The room was empty, except for the mirror above the mantel. In it, he was still standing in the center of the room. But the real Michael was crouched by the fire. He watched in frozen horror as his reflection slowly turned its head toward him. The glass rippled. The reflection pressed its hand against the inside of the mirror, leaving foggy prints. Then its mouth stretched into a smile far too wide. Michael stumbled backward. No, no, you're not real. The mirror began to crack, spiderwebs of fractures spreading across the surface. From within, something pushed outward, fingers, pale and long, reaching through the splintering glass. He screamed, grabbing a log from the fire, and hurled it at the mirror. It shattered completely, exploding into 1,000 shards. The sound echoed through the cabin, bouncing off the walls. For a moment, silence. Then, a whisper from behind him. You shouldn't have done that. He turned, and came face to face with himself. The double stood less than 3 feet away, eyes gleaming faintly in the dim light. Its expression was calm, too calm. Michael stumbled back, fire poker raised. Who? What the hell are you? He demanded. The double smiled, head tilting slightly. You. Its voice was exactly his own. No, Michael said, voice cracking. You're not. Before he could finish, the thing lunged. They crashed to the floor, grappling, rolling across the splintered wood. Michael managed to grab the poker and swing it upward, striking the thing's shoulder. It screamed, a sound that was both his and not his. It pinned him, hands closing around his throat. Up close, its skin looked wrong, too smooth, almost plastic, like wax stretched over bone. Its eyes were hollow, reflecting nothing but his own terror. He kicked, clawed, twisted. Finally, with a desperate shove, he threw it off and scrambled to his feet. The thing was already getting up. He bolted for the stairs, slamming the door behind him and locking it. The pounding began immediately. He backed into the bedroom, searching for something, anything, to use as a weapon. The only light came from the moon filtering through the dirty window. The pounding stopped. He held his breath. A faint creak. He turned toward the window and froze. There was another him outside. And another. And another. Dozens of faces stared in from the fog, pale and smiling. All of them him. Michael stumbled back from the window, nearly tripping over the chair. His pulse thundered in his ears, and every breath came short and sharp, like his body was trying to outrun what his mind couldn't accept. The faces outside didn't move. They just stared. Their smiles were faint, identical. Not joyful, not cruel, just patient. Like something that had been waiting far too long. He couldn't hear them breathe. Couldn't hear them move. Only the faint creak of the cabin's old wood as it settled under the weight of silence. Then one of the figures lifted a hand, a perfect mirror of his own, and tapped the window. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound was gentle, but it carried through the cabin like a hammer blow. Go away, Michael screamed, voice hoarse. You're not real. None of you are real. As if answering, every reflection outside tilted their heads in unison. The movement was slow, deliberate. Wrong. The fog thickened again, swallowing their shapes one by one until only the faint outline of faces remained, pressed against the glass. Then, all at once, the cabin plunged into darkness. The moonlight vanished. Michael fumbled for his phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam of white light sliced through the blackness, landing on the far wall. He was alone, or so he thought. In the reflection of the window, standing just behind him, was another figure. He spun, light shaking wildly, but there was nothing there. He turned back. Now the reflection wasn't holding a flashlight. His hand trembled as he raised the light higher. The reflection stared back, breathing just slightly out of sync with him. Then it whispered, barely audible through the glass. Trade places. Michael dropped the phone. The light blinked out when it hit the floor. He scrambled for it, cursing under his breath, hands searching in the dark. He could hear something now. A faint tapping sound, like footsteps, moving across the ceiling. It circled above him once, twice, then stopped. He froze. A single drop of water, or blood, fell from the ceiling, landing on the back of his hand. He looked up. A face stared down at him from the rafters, hanging upside down, mouth stretching into that impossible smile. He screamed and threw himself backward as the thing dropped, landing with a dull, fleshy thud. The floor shook. He grabbed the chair, swung it with all his strength, and felt it splinter against something solid. The creature, his double, snarled, the sound low and guttural. Its head jerked at a strange angle, bones cracking. And then, it laughed. Not a mad laugh. Not evil. Just his laugh. Michael bolted from the room, slamming the door behind him. He raced down the hall toward the stairs, but at the end stood another version of himself, blocking the way. This one was calm, expressionless. Its eyes followed him without blinking. Michael froze. The other him took a slow step forward. "Stop fighting it," it said softly, voice perfectly level. "You don't understand what you are." Michael's back hit the wall. "Get out of my way. You're not supposed to be here anymore." The double raised its hand, slowly, carefully, as if reaching out to touch him. Michael shoved past it and ran, barreling down the stairs, nearly slipping on the wood. The cabin seemed to shift around him, the walls groaning, stretching. Every reflection in every glass surface, the window, the TV, the picture frames, was moving differently now. Some smiled, some frowned, some just watched. All of them were him. He burst through the front door and into the fog. The cold hit him like a wave. The air outside felt thick, heavy, almost solid. He could barely see 3 feet ahead. He ran anyway. Branches slapped his face, mud sucked at his boots, and the sound of footsteps followed him. Too many footsteps. He didn't dare look back. Somewhere ahead, the faint glow of the pond shimmered through the mist. He stumbled toward it, gasping. The water's surface was perfectly still, so still it looked like glass. And in that glassy reflection, dozens of him stood around the edge of the water, staring down. But when he looked up, the space around the pond was empty. Only the reflections moved. Their lips began to move, soundlessly, chanting something beneath the surface of the water. Michael fell to his knees. "Please," he begged. "I don't know what you want." One reflection, his, but wrong, lifted a hand and pointed at him. Its mouth formed the words clearly. This time, "You're not real." The ground beneath him shifted. The air thickened, shimmering like heat haze. His reflection smiled faintly and stepped forward, out of the pond, breaking through the water without a ripple. It stood before him, dripping wet but perfectly calm. "You were never meant to leave the mirror," it whispered. Michael backed away, shaking his head. No, that's not possible. But the world was already bending. The trees warped. The fog pulsed. The air felt like it was breathing. He turned and ran, but his body felt heavy, slow. Each step dragged, as if the ground itself was pulling him down. The world flickered, one moment forest, one moment glass. And then, suddenly, he was inside again. The cabin. Only everything was reversed. The furniture was mirrored. The clock ticking backward. The writing on his laptop unreadable. The fire burned blue. And in the reflection on the opposite wall, he saw himself, standing outside the cabin, in the fog, pounding on the door. He screamed, slamming his hands against the inside of the glass. "Help me, I'm here." But the other Michael didn't hear him. He just turned, looked through the window, and whispered, "It's time to trade places." The reflection of the mirror world Michael began to crack, just as the real one had before. The glass shattered, and light poured through. Michael felt himself being pulled, his body stretching, tearing, every nerve screaming as reality flipped. And then, darkness. When he woke, he was standing outside the cabin. The fog had lifted. The sun was rising between the trees, golden and soft. The air was clean, calm. He blinked, disoriented, and looked around. Everything looked normal again. The nightmare was gone. He turned toward the window, half expecting to see his reflection staring back. And he did, only it wasn't following his movements. Inside the cabin, through the glass, stood another him, banging silently on the window, screaming words Michael couldn't hear. He smiled faintly. "Trade complete," he whispered. Then he turned away, walking toward the woods as the muffled screams echoed behind the glass. The cabin remained still for days. When the local ranger finally came to check on the writer, after friends reported not hearing from him, he found the place covered in dust, mirrors shattered, windows fogged over. The power was out, the generator cold. He stepped inside and froze. Every mirror surface in the cabin, every shard of glass, reflected the same face. A man pounding from the inside, mouth open in a silent scream. And though the ranger never saw anyone else that day, he swore he heard faint knocking on the inside of the bathroom mirror when he left. Tap, tap, tap. For more stories, like and subscribe.